When emergency responders arrived at a small apartment in the city of Bremen on February the 16th, 2016, it was already too late. A young man had called them after finding his girlfriend dead in their shared apartment. His girlfriend Cathy, a 23-year-old caregiver, had hanged herself in the living room with a leather belt in broad daylight. There were no signs of external violence, and the marks on her neck were consistent with strangulation. It was known that Cathy had suffered from severe depression for years, so for the authorities, the case was quickly closed. Until an investigative journalist heard about it. Cathy's mother had contacted one of his colleagues because she doubted the suicide theory. Cathy had indeed been depressed, but recently she had been doing far better. She wanted to continue her therapy. She had gotten a dog that meant everything to her. She was going out often and spending time with people. Cathy's mother suspected the following. Her daughter had taken her own life, but not entirely of her own free will. Because on her daughter's phone, she had found strange chat messages. Cathy's chat partner called himself Ich Seifert. Cathy had not only chatted with this person frequently in the days leading up to her death, but had also spoken to him on the phone shortly before she died. For 25 minutes and 43 seconds. And the content of the messages was more than alarming. The mysterious chat partner repeatedly brought up her wish to die, asking if she didn't want to finally end it all. A belt would be enough to end her suffering. He could give her step-by-step instructions. The police, however, showed little interest in the chat messages. The case was closed, but not for the investigative journalist and his colleague. Cathy's mother handed them her daughter's phone. The journalists spent days combing through it and found more and more disturbing messages from the man calling himself Ich Seifert. The man seemed to have only one goal: to direct Cathy's thoughts toward taking her own life, and specifically by hanging. That seemed particularly important to him. He also insisted on being present during the suicide, either via video chat or at least by phone. Alarm bells were ringing for the journalist and his colleague, because they did not believe Cathy was his first victim. And they were convinced that violence or fantasies of hanging sexually aroused the man. In Germany, suicide itself is not punishable, nor is assisting it. But something had to be done. A man was lurking in various chat rooms, targeting young women. Young women with psychological problems, easily influenced, whom he manipulated into killing themselves. He had to be stopped. The investigative journalist and his colleague assembled a team. They brought in another colleague, the daughter of a police officer, and the well-known criminal psychologist Lydia Benecke. She specializes in sexual sadism and personality disorders, making her the perfect decoy, as she can immerse herself deeply in the mindset of such individuals. They know, sooner or later, he would look for new victims. The group contacted a self-help forum for people with psychological problems called Glimmer of Hope. According to Cathy's mother, Cathy and the unknown man had met there. She also said that the man used different names on the forum. One of them was Heimu776. With the forum administrator's approval, the group created 2 fake profiles, tailored to the perpetrator's target profile: female, young, depressed, and suicidal. It didn't take long before the first message arrived. from Heimu776. Lydia Benecke chatted with him, disguised as a potential victim. Heimu776 quickly tried to move the conversation to a messaging service, likely to avoid the forum's routine checks. And just as quickly, the topic of suicide came up again with a belt, again by hanging. He even admitted that it aroused him. They had found the phantom. But unfortunately, registering on the forum only required an email address, no real names or personal data. So there was no way to identify who the Death Whisperer was. But then, a month after Cathy's death, the forum administrators forwarded a contact to the investigative team. A young woman whom Heimu had also contacted. Her name was Sarah. Sarah was 23 years old, lived in Leipzig, and suffered from borderline personality disorder, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder after being abused by her grandfather as a child. In the forum, she had poured her heart out in a public post. Shortly afterward, a user named Heimu776 contacted her. He used the same approach as with Cathy. First compassion and understanding, then the request to switch to a private chat where he continued under the name Ich Seifert. And ultimately came the crucial question: do you really want to die? He told her he knew a painless method and that he could help her. All she had to do was travel to Gießen. That's where he lived. He even found her a train connection for the same day. Sarah broke off contact, but saved the conversation. A smart decision, as it later turned out. A week later, when she read online about Cathy's death, she contacted the forum administrators and told them about Heimu. Excerpts from Cathy's chats had been published, and when Sarah compared them to her own, they were almost identical, word for word. This led to contact between Sarah and the investigative team. They exchanged information about the man and discussed how to stop him. But what the team didn't know, Sarah had already formed her own plan. She had been chatting with Heimu776 again for several days. By then, he had manipulated her so much that she was willing to follow his plan and end her life. He constantly switched between empathy and emotional manipulation. First comforting her, then suddenly writing that her grandfather hadn't abused her. She had probably seduced him. Sarah began to trust him. They not only chatted, but also spoke on the phone by now. During these calls, Heimu776 described his fantasies. He tried to get her to put a belt around her neck while naked, just to see how it felt. And eventually, he presented his final plan. She was to travel to Gießen. He would pick her up at the station and drive her to a forest. She should wear a skirt, but no underwear. In the forest, she would undress while he prepared the gallows. After sexually satisfying her, he would carry out the execution. Sarah agreed, but wrote down every phone call and the plan in her suicide note, saved all chat logs so that after her death, Heimu could be found and arrested. She would be free and he could harm no one else. A strange logic, but for Sarah, it gave her death a sense of purpose. On April the 24th, 2016, she planned to take the train to Gießen. But her best friend, whom she had told about the plan and the investigative journalist, managed to stop her at the last minute. He also took her SIM card to cut off contact with Heimu and saved the journalist's number. But 4 days later, on April the 28th, Sarah decided to go through with the plan after all. She boarded a train to Gießen after buying a new phone and a prepaid SIM card at the station. During the journey, she texted her best friend to say goodbye. Panicked, he called the journalist. The journalist called Sarah on her new phone. She answered, but would not be talked out of her plan. When she mentioned she had to change trains in Frankfurt, the journalist suggested meeting her there. If he lost contact, he said, he would call the police immediately. The journalist and a cameraman got into a car and drove to Frankfurt. On the way, they devised a plan to catch the man and have him arrested. But for the plan to work, they needed Sarah as bait. And the journalist knew that he had to convince her to abandon her suicidal intentions. Sarah must not die. At Frankfurt Station, the journalist recognized Sarah immediately. She had shaved her head. He spoke to her gently, and to this day he may not know how, but something about him or his words made her reconsider. She didn't shut him out, and eventually agreed to his plan. It almost seemed as if she was relieved that someone else was taking control of the situation. The journalist and his cameraman informed the police, who fortunately took the matter seriously and headed to Gießen Central Station. Around 11 p.m., the journalist accompanied Sarah to the train. She was to travel to Gießen, meet Heimu, and act normal. Sarah promised to follow the plan, but doubts remained. What if she contacted Heimu on the train and they changed plans? The journalist figured he had no choice. He just had to trust her. Together with his colleague, he drove to Gießen Station, where they met the police. Officers positioned themselves in plain clothes on the platform, including the journalist pretending to be a bored tourist waiting for a connection. And then they waited. Shortly after midnight, the train arrived. Relief spread among them as they saw Sarah step off. As agreed, she ignored the officers and the journalist and walked into the station hall. But Heimu did not show up. But after an hour, just as they were about to call it off, the journalist's phone vibrated. A message from Sarah. He is coming. They watched a heavily overweight man approach Sarah and briefly hug her. Together, they headed toward the parking lot. And then, action. Out of nowhere, several officers rushed to the man and pulled him away from Sarah. It was over. The man was arrested and Sarah was safe. When police searched his car, they found a blue emergency light, a kind of medical case with instruments, and under a floor mat, a plastic bag containing hedge clippers, zip ties, and 3 ropes. The journalist and his cameraman took advantage of the confusion. They approached the man with the camera, and the journalist directly asked the handcuffed man if he was Heimu. Startled to hear the name from a stranger, he replied instinctively, "Yes, why?" This footage would later become crucial evidence in court. That night, it was also revealed that the man behind the name Heimu776 and the name Ich Seifert, Bruno Peters, was no stranger to police. He was 57 years old, married, and the father of a 14-year-old daughter. He had worked various jobs, but was now retired early due to extreme obesity. He was over 400 pounds. He had already been convicted twice. in 1987 for rape and coercion, and in 2007 for aggravated assault. Investigators later found that he had developed a form of sexual sadism in his youth that is considered barely treatable. From 2007 onward, he focused on contacting women online, young, vulnerable, easily influenced. Occasionally, complaints were filed, but he had always gotten away without punishment. That might also explain why he seemed so calm during his arrest. He likely believed nothing would happen this time either. But he was wrong. However, the big question was, how could he be put behind bars? What he had done was vile, but legally difficult to prosecute in both Cathy's and Sarah's case. The prosecutor argued that neither Cathy nor Sarah truly wanted to die. Both had been manipulated, and due to their fragile mental states, neither was capable of making such a grave decision freely. Bruno Peters intended to kill both to satisfy his own desires. That would constitute murder. This argument could work in Cathy's case. For Sarah's case, however, a psychiatric evaluation was needed to support it. Alternatively, there was Section 30 of the German Criminal Code. Agreeing to commit a crime, even if it is never carried out, can be punished with up to 5 years in prison. However, this only applies when 2 people agree to commit a crime against a third party. In Sarah's case, there was only one perpetrator. If the court followed the prosecution in Sarah's case, it would make legal history. In October of 2016, the trial against Bruno Peters began. Initially, only for the crime against Sarah. The psychiatric report supported the prosecution's view. Sarah was not capable of making a free decision at the time. Since no murder had ultimately occurred, Bruno Peters was convicted of declaring willingness to commit murder and sentenced to 7 years in prison. On March the 22nd, 2022, he was then sentenced to life imprisonment for Cathy's murder. The court also ordered preventive detention after his sentence. He will remain imprisoned for the rest of his life. The court found it proven that Bruno had instrumentalized his victims against themselves to harm them. This was also confirmed by 17 other young women whom he had also contacted in various chat rooms. Sarah is doing better today. She continues therapy and has gotten a dog. She has also changed her name, a crucial step for her in leaving the past behind. That was episode 8, The Death Whisperer.